Hi folks, welcome to this week's episode of the Ask the Arb podcast, where we've got a real treat for you. In this week, we're going to be deep diving into listeners' questions. These questions have come flooding into me from all over our social media channels. So sit tight, let's dive in, let's see if we can solve some problems for people. Hi folks, welcome to the Ask the Arb podcast, where this week, we've got another couple of questions from listeners. So we've got Tatiana from Coventry, who is worried about bats and redesigning her whole site. And we've got Joanne in Hastings, who's got some questions about her architect. But before that, this.
It's time for You Couldn't Plan It, the feature where me and my team have scoured the internet for stupid, silly and downright infuriating planning related facts. Let's go.
So this week I've got one. This is actually from back in May. It's from one of the red top newspapers, so it's out of the Mirror, so apologies. But I reckon it's relatively accurate. I've given it some checks here. Obviously, protecting myself from litigation, I'm not saying the Mirror is wrong in any way. Right, so this guy, you kind of got to love this, really. This is a proper chancer. So the headline here says, "Man who built house on his driveway forced to pull it down after bizarre 6-year row." And there's a picture, which again, Kian will pop up on screen for you. And I don't know how he thought he was going to get away with this. So not only is it clearly not what he was given permission for, but it's also right next to the main road, and it's not at all in keeping with the existing property. So this, I'm sure in your mind you're thinking, built a house on his driveway. You need to unpack it a little bit. So this guy was given planning permission for a garage, basically, just a single-story garage with a pitch roof. But instead, he built a whole house, claiming that it was only a minor difference. And this has been going on for 6 years. So the chap was given the go-ahead to build a single-storey garage at his semi-detached home on Vorton Street in Highgate, Birmingham, right back in 2019. So I wonder if he thought he'd get away with this through COVID. Planning bosses were left baffled after discovering a small 2-storey house has been constructed on the driveway instead by October 2022. So clearly this was built in COVID. Top tip, folks, if you are going to try and pull a fast one with the local planning authority, don't do it where Google Street View can clearly show exactly what's going on. And that's exactly what's happened with the images here. Despite arguing there are only minor differences from what was agreed in the appeal, Mr. Singh, who is the owner of it, was ordered to bulldoze the illegal structure. He hasn't bulldozed it, he's just amended it back into the garage that was originally consented. So what it was an 8.7 metre by 8.7 metre by 4.7 metre building, and they were basically using it as a gym, but it's now been converted back into the consented development, which is a 5.3 metre by 4.6 metre garage. So it had some considerable height on it, and it's the pictures are worth looking at. So we'll pop the link in the description below. So there we go. Right, back to the episode. What have we got today? We have got a couple of corking questions in. I'll try and get through more than two this week. We'll see how we go. So Joanne in Hastings says, "Our architect says we'll be fine, but the ecologist says otherwise. Who do we trust?" There's not a lot of detail in that, Joanne. Our architect says we'll be fine, but the ecologist says otherwise. Who do we trust? Well, so this kind of tug of war happens more often than you think, and some of our best clients, in fact, our ideal client within our consultancy is an architect. So I have to be very careful what I say here. But quite often, architects like to try and manage everything for the client, and I do get that. I do understand that. The reason that they do that is because it gives the customer a single point of contact, and they pull everything together. But at the end of the day, architects are very good at designing, but they're not experts in ecology. So both professionals are right in their own world, in their own bubble. The architect is almost certainly going to be, well, they're going to be focused on layout, aren't they? They're going to be focused on the aesthetics. They're going to be focused on what this looks like and the dream that you want to bring to life. They're also going to be thinking about things like planning policy and design viability and how it fits in with everything else that's going on in your local area. Whereas the ecologist, on the other hand, they're going to be thinking about compliance. It's our job to make sure that your property, or your development rather, doesn't harm protected species or habitats. So we need to make sure that you are legally compliant. So we're thinking about things like protected species, protected habitats, seasonal survey windows, and also now increasingly biodiversity net gain. Sorry to swear on the podcast. So who do you trust? Well, ultimately, I think you need to trust the ecologist. You don't say in your question, but if the advice from the ecologist is rooted in their report that they've provided for you, rooted in wildlife and habitats and survey timings and compliance with environmental law and all that sort of stuff, you really need to listen to them. If the ecologist is correct and you ignore them, not only could you be in breach of legislation, but also it's going to make your project timeline a lot longer. And we see that all the time. People don't read our reports and then they wonder why 9 months later their report's rejected because they didn't have the follow-up surveys that they required. And ultimately, this can mean, planning refusal, delays, prosecution potentially if protected species are disturbed, bats being the big one. And at the end of the day, this isn't all theory. Local authorities rely very heavily on ecological reports and arboricultural reports for their decision making. In fact, they rely on reports from all sorts of related services. And if your ecologist has raised a red flag and you proceed based on the architect's optimism, it could end up costing you serious time and money. So my takeaway really is an all parties call. That's what I like to do in these situations. You've got to stop the email ping pong and tennis. Just say, look, we're stopping. Everybody stop. Put your pens down. If you're paying them, this will really get their attention. Stop. Put your pens down. We're going to have a call in 2 days' time at 2:00, and we're going to bottom this out. And I usually find when you've got tonality, when you can look at somebody in the eye, and when you've got that flexibility in the voice, a lot of these issues just fall away and get sorted very quickly. So, before we go on to our next question, we are only going to get two, aren't we? Before we get on to our next question, it's time for this.
It's time for tremendous facts. Oh yeah! Get ready to learn, and that's a fact. Tremendous facts.
Tremendous facts. So, what have we got here? Baobab trees can live for 6,000 years and store thousands of litres of water in their trunks. So that's a good one, isn't it? Redwoods are so tall that rainwater can take 10 minutes to reach the ground from their top branches. Surely that's dependent on ambient temperature and all sorts of stuff. By the way, you can thank ChatGPT for these beautiful questions. Trees can warn each other of danger, like insect attacks, by releasing airborne chemical signals. That's absolutely true. And the last one, Pandu, a grove of aspens in Utah, in the USA, is actually one massive organism, all connected by a single root system, which is possibly the largest living organism on Earth. So that's pretty cool, isn't it? Should we have another one? We'll have two. Trees can change the chemical composition of their leaves to make them less tasty to predators. Yeah, I knew that one. Dragon's blood trees in Socotra Island, is that how you pronounce that? Who knows? Bleed red sap when cut. So there we go. and I can't resist it. One more. The Amazon rainforest is often called the lungs of the earth, producing 20% of the world's oxygen through, though this is debated.
It's time for tremendous facts. Oh yeah. Get ready to learn, and that's a fact. Tremendous facts.
Tremendous facts. Okay, so Tatiana sent this in a couple of weeks back through the Facebook group, and we'll spend a bit of time digging into this because this actually comes up quite a lot. So Tatiana is based in Coventry. She doesn't say what she's doing, but she does say in capitals, so obviously very frustrated. The planning officer said our lighting could affect bats. Does this mean we've now got to redesign the whole site after months and months of silence? No. So what's actually going on here, Tatiana? We do a lot of these. These are what they're basically asking for, and they've not been clear about it. Something called a lighting design strategy or a lighting design plan. So if the planning officer has flagged this, it probably means that one of the consultees has raised it, almost certainly the local authority's in-house ecologist or their external advisors. And they will have basically raised a concern about lighting and bats. So what they're doing is they're flagging a potential impact on a protected species. All 17 species of bats are legally protected under UK law and European law. So that's the Wildlife and Countryside Act and also the habitat regulations. And this includes their roosts, their foraging corridors, and also their commuting routes. So you might not have bats within your building, but they might be in some trees locally. They exploit cavities and cracks and all that kind of good stuff in trees. They might be in some of your neighbours' properties. If you've got a linear feature of trees or hedgerows near your property, then it's quite possible that the bats will be commuting up and down those routes from their roosting places to their feeding grounds. And if the external lighting that you put on your property expands onto those trees and hedgerows or flight paths that the bats use, it can be quite disruptive to their natural behaviour, and that's what the council is basically trying to avoid. And it's a bit of a weird one actually, because we've been out on phase 2 bat activity surveys to observe this behaviour at night, and we've actually seen them, feeding around street lamps and things like that. So it's a bit of a weird one. But the important thing for you, Tatiana, is that it doesn't mean a full redesign. All it really means is that if you've already had ecological surveys done, then your ecologist should have given you a high-level overview of bat commuting activity or what that's likely to be in the local area. You don't need bat activity surveys or anything like that. It may be that you need a bat survey done on your property itself. Maybe you've already had that done. I don't know. But specific to the lighting, you just need to give things a little bit of a tweak, a little bit of a massage to make sure that your lighting is directional, so it's pointing downwards. That the temperature of the lights is of a particular Kelvin rating, and this is the important one, that the lights are on timers and motion sensors as well, so that they're turned off at certain hours and all that kind of good stuff. So it's just about mitigation at the end of the day. You're not starting over. You don't have to start over with this. You just need to make sure that your lighting is not breaking wildlife laws, etc. So it's pretty simplistic, which is good. And looking at my clock, we have got time for a couple more, I think. Let's have a look here. What have we got on my spreadsheet? Oliver says, when do I need a tree survey on my site? Is it mandatory? So it's not always mandatory, but it is often required, and tree surveys often slip through, Oliver. And essentially what we tend to say to people, our assessment team say to people, is if there are trees on or adjacent to the red line boundary of the site, so this is the planning boundary of the site, if there are trees on that boundary or adjacent to that boundary and obviously within the site, then it's likely you're going to need a tree survey. If those trees are bigger than your fist, held at sort of chest height, then those trees would be picked up in a tree survey. Tree surveys are also starting to feed into biodiversity net gain as well, but that's something else for another day. So if you've got trees on or adjacent to the red line boundary of your site, you're probably going to need a tree survey to get your application validated, because all local planning authorities have policy to make sure that development isn't going to impact existing trees, and it's irrelevant whether the trees are protected by tree preservation orders or they're located within a conservation area. You're going to have it done anyway. Sometimes if you haven't submitted a tree survey to get the application validated, it might sneak through and then someone else will pick up on it later on. Sometimes the planning officer, if they're a bit switched on or they've got local knowledge, they may well look at Google Street View or something like that. So, in the grand scheme of things, a tree survey actually isn't that expensive. So that's that. Have we got time for one more? We'll do one more. We've got one here from Simon, and Simon says, no pun intended, what's the difference between a tree survey, a tree constraints plan, and an arboricultural method statement? The tree survey is the site element, Simon. So this is where a consultant will come out to site. They'll collect all sorts of measurements and data on those trees. So that's the tree survey bit of it. But sometimes people will say, I need a tree survey. But that's just the site element. A tree constraints plan is where all of the measurements and numbers and figures and things that they have collected are applied to the centre point of a tree on a plan, and not only are the trees shown on that plan, but your development proposals are shown on that plan as well. And the reason it's called a constraints plan is it will basically show you what impact the trees could potentially have on the areas available for development on the site. It will show the category and quality of the trees. So it may be that some trees can be removed. It may be that others have to be retained and they become a constraint to the project. So a tree survey and a tree constraints plan is often called an arboricultural impact assessment. Every planning application with trees should be supported by that. An arboricultural method statement comes later on. Sometimes with complex projects it might be provided up front, but the arboricultural method statement basically talks about how the retained trees will be protected through the development phases and beyond, with tree protection fencing, ground protection boarding, and all that kind of good stuff. So that is it for this week. Thanks to Oliver, Simon, Tatiana and Joanna for the questions that you sent in. Much appreciated. I hope you've got the answers that you needed. And remember, folks, if you need any help with anything to do with planning, reach out to us and we'll do our best to help you. Catch you on the next one.